Hello and welcome to North Country Matters. My name is Donna Seymour. I'm a member of the St. Lawrence County League of Women Voters, one of the civic partners for this show. Today we're going to be talking about the 2020 election season, which starts early and goes for a long time, actually, because there's three different elections. My guest is Kathleen Stein, who is the president of the local St. Lawrence County League of Women Voters. Kathy, welcome back to North Country Matters.
Well, thank you for having me again, Donna.
It has been, it's been 100 years since the League started in 1920, and we've kind of been waiting for 2020 for a long time, although not quite 100 years between the two of us, have we? So this is the centennial year for the League. And there's a lot going on that the League is involved in. It's going to be an exciting election year. Let's talk a little bit about what the history of the League here is locally, Kathy, before we go into the 2020.
Into 2020. Yeah, the League was founded by Carrie Chapman Catt in 1920, as Donna mentioned. But the League here in St. Lawrence University was also...
County,
sorry. I teach at St. Lawrence University, and I just came from teaching. In St. Lawrence County, also in 1920, so we were right on top of things. There were local leagues in Canton, Potsdam, and Ogdensburg. And the purpose was founded by suffragists, and they were determined to inform the new voters, but men and women alike. It was never intended to be just for women. And they had high hopes that with women getting the vote, that a lot of things could be changed, that they were, reformers. And so the League, we do take a lot of public policy issues, and not just on voting rights and that kind of thing. So the League, there was a bit of a hiatus in the League in the early 2000s, whatever we called it. But in 2008, we revived the League in St. Lawrence County, and we're going pretty strong, I think.
I think we are too, and what's I think particularly interesting is that one of the reasons that a lot of local folks got re-energized in the League is we kind of looked at what happened in 2008 and said, gee, our public life is not very civil or very civic, and so we thought we could help to bring that back, and unfortunately our public life is not very civic or very civil still, so there is more work to do. For sure.
There's always work to do.
So here in New York State, we saw an exciting number of voting reforms that were passed last year in 2019 that make ballot access easier for New Yorkers. And probably the biggest reform was early voting, which debuted for the general election last fall. Kathy, you were an early voter, I was an early voter. How did early voting go here in St. Lawrence County and across the state? There were the League was followed that very closely and had learned some things about it, didn't they?
Yes. The League mounted a public education campaign, and we locally tried to do what we could to get the word out. Certainly, we found that early voting went very well in St. Lawrence County. It was very smooth. The electronic poll books were wonderful. They were ready to go. Printing the ballots on demand, and this will eliminate a lot of waste. So that worked very smoothly. There were plenty of people there was only one polling site for St. Lawrence County, but they certainly had plenty of people on hand for a crush of people. And it worked very well. The League did a survey statewide and received 1,800 responses from voters representing 54 counties. And they reported data about 2,239 individual polling sites. So it was a pretty representative sample. And they found many places it worked well. There were some places where there were some issues. We were rather proud of ourselves here in St. Lawrence County because from the North Country, St. Lawrence County represented more than half of all the survey respondents up here. So we thought we'd done a pretty good job about circulating the survey to get some feedback. So.
Right, and the thing you have to remember is, although there were 239 individual poll sites, many, like St. Lawrence County, only had one poll site. So for a lot of rural counties, there was only one place to go. And that, of course, ended up being one of the recommendations that came out of the league survey. They had an opportunity to testify to the state when the state was looking at how early voting went this year. So, and they made a number of recommendations. So Kathy, let's talk about what those recommendations were that the league made to the state to improve the process.
Yes, yeah, and the issue of in small counties, because the law is that only need to have one polling site for every 50,000 active voters. And so in a lot of counties like St. Lawrence, rural counties, that meant one polling site. However, and of course the cheapest and most efficient thing to do is exactly what St. Lawrence County did, is have the polling site in the Board of Elections offices in Canton. However, that's not the population center in the county. So one of the things that the league has recommended is that the law, if that's the case, that there needs to also be a polling site in the population center, so that, to cut down on how far people need to commute. Also increased poll worker training. Everything went smoothly here in St. Lawrence County, but in some places, the poll workers were not as familiar. There was a lot of new technology with the electronic poll books and the printers and whatnot. So more training, just to kind of mandate more training. Expanding the Board of Elections outreach to educate voters about early voting, and it's going to take a few years. This is a very new thing in New York. We're kind of
we're behind the curve in offering it.
Yes. So we need, there needs to be more education effort. And in general, more state funding. I mean, especially in 2020. I mean, yes, last year was an off year. This year we're going to have 3 rounds of early voting with 2 primary elections and the general election. And states just need some help with this.
Yeah, the state looked at...
Counties need help from the state.
Yes, the state and the counties all looked at 2019 as just their test case, sort of the first shot out of the cannon, thinking that they would learn where the problems were, where things went well, because they knew that 2020 was going to be a very busy year in terms of that. So they really did look at it as a test case, and if we actually take the recommendations and learn from what happened, things should go pretty smoothly this year. And one of the things that you mentioned, Kathy, was about needing more money, and the governor's 2020 budget, which just came out relatively a few days ago, did make some spending proposals around early voting. Can you give us an outline of those, please?
Yes, and we were, the league was pleased, and other good government groups were pleased. He proposed $10 million in funds targeted at early voting, $15 million for the purchase of electronic poll books, and $16 million for the completion of an online voter registration system. And however, the league really feels that these funds are not sufficient. I mean, we cannot make this new, expansive opportunity to vote be an undue burden on counties. So we've asked for the State League has requested the opportunity to testify before the Joint Committee on Public Protection on February 12th and to make the case for increased funding both for early voting and for the general operations of the State Board of Elections. So we'll see how that goes.
Yes, and we have to keep in mind that 2020 is a presidential election year, which is always traditionally the highest turnout of any election that we host over the 4-year period from the beginning to the end. So last year was the low of voter turnout, and this year will be the high of voter turnout. So we really do need to get the bugs worked out of the system, and we do need to, to take advantage of giving folks the information they need in order to be able to use the system effectively. Late in 2019, the governor also signed some additional bills that went into law that will affect elections here in New York. So let's review those briefly for folks too. Kathy.
The poll watching and staffing on election days. Just last Tuesday, the signing of things that were passed in 2019 continues here. It's clarified the process governing poll watchers on election day, and another bill that is also meant to ensure that polling sites are properly staffed based on a location's needs, because sometimes some polling sites have far fewer registered eligible voters. This is especially relevant for the primaries. And to require those polling sites to maintain as heavy a staffing, a uniform staffing. So it's more flexibility, that's a good thing. And the other governs how many poll watchers that candidates and political committees can have for each election district. And so that updates the law there, so that clarifies things.
And sort of piggybacking on your comments, the governor also signed a couple of new laws late in the year. One is to create more standardized and consolidated voting districts, particularly where there are less than 10 eligible voters, because it's crazy to have a district with so few voters open for the number of hours that a polling district is open, because that's just a waste of Board of Election resources to keep that polling district open. So it also, there's also a bill that he signed that creates a uniform poll closing time on election night. And again, to streamline and modernize how the whole process works, because there has been discrepancies over the years about when polls have to close. One of the things that changed last year is that now all counties use the same primary election hours. Used to be the rural counties could close at 6 o'clock, urban counties stayed open till 9. Now everybody stays open till 9, so that access for voters is similar. It doesn't matter where you live. So those are important things.
Yeah, poll opening as well. That used to be enormously confusing upstate here, as
Right.
some people listening may have experienced themselves, showing up thinking the polls were opening at 6 and discovering it wasn't until noon. So now it's 6 o'clock everywhere.
That's AM.
AM, yeah, oh yeah. Sowing confusion, that's all I need to do.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
Campaign disclosure law approved. Now this, I think this is really an enormous improvement. This measure requires campaign committees and candidates to include a paid-for by disclaimer on print, digital, display, and auditory ads. And this was approved by the governor, signed by the governor recently. The bill, in essence, aligns New York's paid campaign advertising disclosure rules with the federal government's own regulation. That's always a good thing. But also to get rid of two-tiered systems. But in particular, this was meant to counteract anonymous political spending in New York races, especially on social media platforms. And we know that this has been a growing problem. And when companies like Facebook, frankly, refuse to remove false and misleading campaign ads, at least we can have it identified who's paying for them, so that people know where this false and misleading information is coming from. So I think this is particularly important.
Yes, it is, especially, we've already seen a lot of negative campaigning that's going on, particularly at the federal level, which is really disheartening, because probably nothing turns voters off more than negative campaigning. They want to find out what candidates think, they want to find out what their positions are, and when all they hear is the negative stuff, they're not learning something that helps them to go into the voting booth and be an informed voter. So.
Exactly.
We've also tried to clarify some absentee voting rules and streamline that process. New York has always had a cumbersome absentee ballot process, so the application now is a little simpler than it was, and it will make sure that the ballot that is sent to voters matches that's the one they'll actually be using on election day. And part of this is now, because of these print-on-demand ballots, it's going to be much easier, because some of these ballots had to include, if they're an absentee ballot for the whole county, it had to include information that might not be pertinent to you as a voter in your district. So that will be helpful. And the second bill that was signed says that absentee ballots can also be used in school district elections, which is really important, because that's another important civic engagement process that people can take part in the spring.
Mm-hmm. And often don't,
Right.
whereas this will encourage people to do so. There's also a new law that bars political parties from changing their names. And the bill, will affect ballot lines that have status for the next election cycle. So this is gonna take effect right away. And one of the more recent examples of the process of changing names was the creation of the Stop Common Core Party in the 2014 gubernatorial campaign of Rob Astorino to highlight education to, standardize educational standards. Okay, fine. But then the party changed its name later to the broad, the Reform Party, which is sort of vaguer and broader, but with still the same position. But, this kind of thing can be kind of misleading. As the Assemblywoman Sandy Gallup said, who was the sponsor of it, said, voters deserve honesty and transparency in the election process, starting with the party's names and what they stand for.
Well, that actually would be the ideal, and hopefully this bill will get us a little closer to that ideal.
Yes,
so that's for
yes.
sure. So, Kathy, let's give folks a picture of the political calendar that's going to take place in 2020 when it comes to registering to vote and the elections, because it's kind of a complicated picture this year, isn't it?
It is. There are a lot of dates here. The first date that I want viewers to be aware of is Valentine's Day. February 14th is the deadline this year to change or designate a party affiliation before the presidential primary. And this is a huge improvement. The League could not be happier about this because, of course, in order to vote in the primary, in New York State, you must be registered in that party to vote in that party's primary.
That's right. We don't have an open primary system in this state. So.
Absolutely. And so, but the deadline used to be 9 months before would have been 9 months before this election before. Now this puts it about 10 weeks ahead of the April 28th presidential primary. That's what we're referring to. So this makes New York now 49th in the nation in terms of how far ahead. We moved from 50th to 49th.
Well, there's still work to be done.
There's work to be done, but this is a big improvement. So if you have not designated a party, or if you want to change your party affiliation, February 14th is the date.
And the other thing we should just mention about the February 14th date is that's actually the League's 100th birthday.
That's right. That's right. So
and it's Valentine's Day, so
it's
there you go.
It's a wonderful day right there. There's nothing bad about it. So April 28th, as I just mentioned, is the date for the presidential primary election in New York. Early voting, we'll start the education on early voting. Early voting period will be from April 18th through April 26th. The last day to register to vote in that primary is April 3rd. So there's the date to change your party affiliation or declare it, but the date to register to vote in that primary is April 3rd. We said it was complicated.
And just to clarify, you can actually register to vote on any day during the year in New York State, but if you want to vote in these particular elections, you must be registered to vote by the deadline, but anybody can register on any day.
Absolutely.
So it can be a little confusing. It sounds like you can't register until that date, and the truth is you can register anytime, but in order to vote on the 28th, you must be registered by April 3rd.
April 3rd.
So, which is not that long a period, actually.
No, that's 25 days.
Yeah.
The next primary, the state and local primary elections, is June 23rd. They're consolidated now. This is a good thing. Early voting period for the state and local primaries will be June 13th through 21st. The registration deadline is May 29th for that June 23rd election. And the general election is November 3rd, and with early voting taking place from October 21st to November 1st. And the deadline to register to vote in the general election is October 9th. And also want to put a little plug in for National Voter Registration Day, which this year is September 22nd. And the League is one of the organizations. This is a national movement.
It's a coalition, yeah.
Yeah, it's a
groups,
coalition, and to kind of have a special day to remind everybody, no matter what the election deadline is, to remind people to register to vote. So.
And the other thing that we can encourage everyone to do is, if you have any questions about this, if you go to St. Lawrence County Board of Elections website, and we'll have that link in the show notes, it's constantly being updated with new information. So as these deadlines come up, they will have notification of that. It's really a very comprehensive site. There's a lot of really good information for voters and for candidates, because candidates also have to follow a certain calendar of during the year in order to get on a ballot. So there's good information for voters, there's good information for people who want to run for office. So, and you keep in mind that not only is 2020 a presidential election year, we'll also be electing the House of Representatives for New York State. All of the assembly members and all of the senators are also up for election. So it will be a busy ballot.
It will be extensive.
So Kathy, let's take a minute just to remind folks about the League locally and how they can join and how they can support our work, because we have members and friends.
We do. We have members and friends. To be a member, you have to be 18 years old, a citizen of the United States, but we certainly welcome younger persons, people who are residents in the U.S. who are interested, and or people who just don't really want to join the organization but want to get on our mailing list and hear about things that are going on locally. All they have to do is contact me to do that. To join, there's a link. It's on our website and probably from our Facebook page as well.
Yes,
I haven't checked, but so you can join easily online. And when you're a member, you get information. There's lots of opportunities for activism via the League. We belong to a number of coalitions working on voting rights, working on women's issues, and other issues such as the Campaign for New York Health Act. So you can find out, you can get plugged into these other opportunities for action, and also the League itself sends out alerts for members and friends to get in touch with elected officials on various issues.
And let's remind, especially in St. Lawrence County, where we have 4 colleges, that the League has opened up membership for a reduced rate to college students, and we have several college students locally who are involved in the League as a result of it.
Absolutely.
But that's really a great way to get your toe in the water of civic education and participation, isn't it?
Exactly. Yes, and I will take this opportunity to remind people that the League is a nonpartisan organization. We do not endorse either any political party, any individual political candidate.
So, in addition to the political calendar and the voting calendar, let's talk a little bit about what the League has on its calendar this spring. So we had mentioned that February 14th is the 100th anniversary of the League of Women Voters, and it's also being called the Women Power the Vote Day of Action. So let's talk a little bit about what Women Power the Vote Day of Action is all about.
Yes, the National League of Women Voters is asking nationwide members to engage in some kind of activism to celebrate the League's birthday, rather than having a party or something. Although I'm sure one could have a party too, that would be fine. But specifically, some action. And so the New York State League is going to ask members and going to provide social media kit and things like that to specifically contact elected officials about more funding for the voting process, for early voting, and for to help pay for these reforms, electronic poll books and whatnot. And this will be on the 14th, which will be only a couple of days after the League's testimony, which I mentioned before. So I think this is a particularly good idea, nice follow-up to have members.
It is, and it also falls in the middle of the New York State budget building process. So that activism is going to be hitting just when the legislatures need to hear it.
Yes.
So that's a good thing. And So part of what the league does is voter education on issues, but a lot of what we do is voter registration drives. So let's talk a little bit, Kathy, about some of the local voter registration efforts that will be going on this spring, because we have 3 different deadlines this year to help people make sure they're ready to vote in the presidential primary, the state and local primary, and then the general election.
Absolutely. Yes, we already have a couple of voter registration dates set up in the run-up to this February 14th deadline at SUNY Canton and SUNY Potsdam. We will be organizing voter registration drives on campuses in the run-up to the deadlines for the presidential primary deadline, the state and local primary. That will be summertime, the students will be gone. But you can look for the league at various summer festivals. We'll certainly be at the Potsdam Summer Fest, I'm sure, and other things like that. We'll be doing voter registration there. And then come fall, National Voter Registration Day, but we'll be having other voter registration drives. And you can look for our voter education materials, a voter guide, part 1 and 2, and other things at the public libraries, also food pantries, and other locations like that, where we try to make those materials available.
Right. And as if 2020 weren't busy enough with the presidential election and the House of Representatives and the Assembly and the Senate here in New York State, 2020 is also the 10-year census, and the league is very involved in making sure that the census count happens, and that part of that is to educate folks about why it's important to fill out their census. So we have a program coming up on February 6th. Let's talk about that for a few minutes, Kathy.
Yes, we're delighted to be having a partnership specialist from the Census Bureau, Nicole Jordan, and she's going to be speaking at 7 p.m. on February 6th at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Canton. That's 3.5 East Main Street. And we're co-sponsoring with the UU Church's Social Action Committee. And the partnership specialist in her presentation is geared to organizations and agencies who can do outreach to their clients to ensure the full and complete census count. But really, this will be of interest to anyone. You know, the information is very important. And also, the Census Bureau has a wealth of information that we're going to try to make use of. Starting with, and you can check our website and our Facebook page, with a short video, how to fill out the online form, because this is going to be the first census conducted online. Now, you could also call in, do the form, fill out the form online, calling 800 number, and there will be, follow-up when people who haven't responded to the online invitation to file online. There will be census takers going around and whatnot, but really the goal is to try to have as many people do this online. And I watched this video. It's about 6 minutes long. It is quite informative, and it's helpful to have a look at it so you get an idea what to expect. And there are also a number of wonderful and very well done public service announcements that explain how very important the census is, because it's, well, first of all, at the last census in 2010, New York State lost 2 seats in Congress. And we know that, at least we think we know, that the population of the state has been declining, and we may lose another seat in Congress. But we don't want to lose any more than we have to. So we need to get a good count. We must not have an undercount.
And in fact, in the 2010 census, New York ranked 45th of the states with the worst census participation. So again, this is an area that we really need to take a lot of information and get it to people, because it affects so many things. The funding, it affects all the federal funding that comes back for housing, highways, transportation, education, essentially everything that New Yorkers need to access every day is determined largely by the census returns that the federal government gets. Based on the 2010 census, New York received about $73 billion a year. Over a 10-year period. That's real money.
That adds up.
Yes, it does add up. So we really need to get a good count, and the league has been outreaching to many organizations in the county to try to get them on board, and they've all responded very positively. So we're really looking forward to having a great effort up here, because we know there are populations that will be hard to count because it's online. Seniors may be a little intimidated by that process. People who don't have good access to the internet, they'll have problems. I know all of the public libraries are working on this issue, so there's going to be a large effort. And here at North Country Matters, we'll be doing some programming around this as well to get people some information. So when you get that census information, fill it out. It's critical, and it's critical to our quality of life up here.
It is, and just to mention, hard to count communities. I was absolutely stunned to discover that historically, one of the very worst, and getting worse, is children under 5. People just don't think they have to count them when people respond to the census and don't count them. You can imagine how that affects school funding, planning for schools, and that kind of thing. And renters are another problem, right. And of course we have communities up here that have a lot of renters.
Right, and although college students who live on campus are counted by the campus, anybody who's a commuter who lives off campus could be falling through the cracks. So that's another population in this county that's a significant population that to get that information to, and to be able to count for an accurate picture of who actually lives up here for the next 10 years. This isn't just something that this affects us for a very long period of time, and so we need to make sure we do it right. Kathy, thank you for coming in today. We've covered a lot of material, we always do. And all of these dates and things will be in our show notes, so you'll be able to access the information, and to hopefully it'll help you make sure that you are registered to vote in front of each one of these important elections that we have coming up this year, and we'll make sure that your census count is counted. Be counted. It's important.
Stand up and be counted.
So, or you can even sit down to be counted, but just be counted.
Whatever, be counted.
Thank you, Kathy, very much.
Thank you, Don.
These conversations are a production of North Country Matters, which is filmed here in the Fred W. Cleveland Computer Center of the Potsdam Public Library. This show is a civic collaboration between the League of Women Voters of St. Lawrence County and the Potsdam Public Library. Until next time, remember, our North Country matters and counts. Kathy, thank you for coming in.
Thank you, Don.